Donald Trump declared something that stunned the room into silence. At Quantico, Virginia, before nearly 800 generals, admirals, and senior advisors, he announced what sounded like a declaration of war against his own country. Not against Russia, not against China, not against Iran or North Korea, but against America itself, against American cities, against American citizens, against anyone who dared to disagree with him. And the nation must understand the magnitude of what was said in that room. From the very beginning, Trump set the stage with intimidation. He told the assembled military leaders that if anyone dared to leave, they would lose their rank, their career, their future. Think about that for a moment. The commander-in-chief threatening the careers of decorated generals and admirals, men and women who had dedicated their lives to defending the Constitution, simply for walking out of a speech. It was a demand not for respect, not for discipline, but for loyalty to one man. And in that demand, in that silence, you could feel the fear ripple through the room. He tried to play it off with jokes, telling them not to laugh, telling them they could applaud or sit silently, but always with the threat lingering. If you don't fall in line, you are finished. That's not democracy. That's coercion. That's how authoritarian leaders establish dominance, not through consent, but through fear. Then came the substance of his speech, and this is where the real danger revealed itself. Trump named San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles 4 of America's largest, most vibrant cities, not as communities to protect, but as battlefields. He described them as war zones. He said they should be used as training grounds for the military. He called it a war from within, and the implication was crystal clear. He sees American citizens, especially those in cities that lean democratic, as enemies of the state. This wasn't law and order rhetoric. This wasn't about crime prevention. This was about turning the U.S. military into a weapon against his own people. And if you listened closely, you heard echoes of history. Authoritarian regimes throughout the 20th century rose on this same formula. Define an internal enemy, label them as dangerous, dehumanize them, then justify the use of military force against them. It happened in Nazi Germany. It happened in Stalinist Russia. It happened in military juntas across Latin America. And now, Donald Trump was attempting to normalize it in the United States. To sell his vision, he exaggerated and invented stories. He described firemen climbing ladders to rescue people, being shot at by what he called animals. He painted images of chaos, of violent inner cities spiraling out of control. But fact-checkers quickly dismantled his claims. CNN's Daniel Dale pointed out that the statistics he used were false. Crime rates in those cities were not what Trump described. Biden, whom Trump mocked for supposedly never praising the U.S. military, has in fact called it the strongest military in the history of the world repeatedly. Trump claimed Biden tried to dismantle Space Force. False. Trump claimed Venezuela and the Congo emptied prisons and sent criminals into America. False. He inflated immigration numbers. False. He exaggerated aid to Ukraine. False. He claimed to have ended wars that still continue. False. The lies piled up one after another, but the lies were not the most dangerous part. What mattered was the intent behind them. The lies were used as scaffolding to build a justification for labeling dissent as treason, a justification for unleashing soldiers not on foreign battlefields but in American streets. Generals in that room knew what they were hearing. They had fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, in Kosovo and Somalia. They knew what it meant to call a city a war zone. They knew what it meant to send in troops to pacify a population. And the horror on their faces wasn't confusion. It was recognition. They understood the gravity of what Trump was proposing. Former President Barack Obama once warned that Trump's rhetoric was violence against the truth. Vice President Kamala Harris warned that Trump would try to use the language of law and order to justify force against Americans. And here it was, playing out live in a Marine Corps base auditorium, the redefinition of American citizens as enemies. And while Trump spoke, his lies continued to spiral. He repeated the big lie that the 2020 election was stolen from him, despite overwhelming evidence and court rulings proving otherwise. He claimed he had ended wars in Africa and Europe, when in fact conflicts in the Democratic Republic of Congo and tensions between Kosovo and Serbia continue to this day. He exaggerated Biden's immigration policies, inflating numbers into the tens of millions without evidence. He even claimed credit for peace agreements that never actually held. To his supporters, these may sound like strongman boasts. To his critics, they are absurd. But to the military leaders in that room, and to anyone who has studied the patterns of authoritarian regimes, these are red flags. A man who uses lies to justify force. A man who weaponizes fear. A man who demands loyalty above law. That is not a democratic leader. That is a tyrant in the making. The comparison to history is unavoidable. Adolf Hitler rose to power not by conquering foreign nations first, but by defining enemies within Jews, communists, political dissidents, and then using state power to crush them. Benito Mussolini turned Italy's military and police inward to suppress workers and political opponents. In Chile, Augusto Pinochet used the military against his own citizens in the name of restoring order. In each case, it began with rhetoric. It began with speeches labeling fellow citizens as threats. It began with leaders convincing the military that loyalty to the leader outweighed loyalty to the people. Trump's speech at Quantico belongs in that same lineage. It was not a policy address. It was a rehearsal for authoritarianism. And the silence of the generals in that room must be understood not as agreement, but as shock. Military leaders in the United States swear an oath not to the president, but to the Constitution. They understand civilian control of the military as the foundation of democracy. Yet here they were, hearing a former president openly declare that the military should prepare to fight American citizens. The silence was not loyalty. It was disbelief. It was the stunned realization of just how far Trump was willing to go. It is important to understand how Trump's message was amplified. Conservative outlets portrayed it as a tough-on-crime stance. They ignored the authoritarian undertones. They ignored the fact that he threatened the careers of generals for disagreeing. They ignored the fact that he labeled American cities as war zones. But the mainstream press fact-checkers and independent journalists highlighted the reality. This was one of the darkest speeches Trump has ever delivered. And that is saying something. Because Trump has made dark speeches before. He has lied before. He has threatened before. But never before has he so plainly declared that America itself was his enemy, that its cities were battlefields, and that its military should prepare for war against its own people. For everyday Americans, the implications are terrifying. Imagine tanks rolling through New York City streets, not as part of a parade, but as part of a crackdown on dissent. Imagine soldiers occupying Chicago neighborhoods, treating protests as insurgencies. Imagine generals ordered to turn their firepower inward, told that their new mission is not defending the Constitution, but defending Trump. That is what his words pointed toward, and that is what must never be allowed to happen. Even beyond the authoritarian threat, Trump's lies themselves are corrosive. When leaders lie about crime, about elections, about wars, they erode trust in institutions. They make truth itself a casualty. As Obama said, it becomes violence against the truth. And when truth dies, democracy follows. The danger is not abstract. It is immediate. When a leader declares war against his own people, even in words, he normalizes the idea that dissent is treason. He plants the seed that violence against political opponents is justified. He invites the military to see citizens as enemies. That is not leadership. That is not patriotism. That is authoritarianism. And make no mistake, this was not a moment of misspeaking. Trump doubled down throughout the speech. He insisted these cities would be straightened out one by one. He insisted the war from within was real. He insisted that only force could restore order. The repetition was intentional. The message was clear. The generals who sat in that room will remember that day. The journalists who fact-checked his words will remember that day. The Americans who still believe in democracy must remember that day. Because history will look back on it as a warning that a man once entrusted with the presidency openly declared war on his own country. A warning that generals sat in stunned silence as the words echoed through Quantico. A warning that authoritarianism does not arrive all at once, but piece by piece, speech by speech, lie by lie, until one day it becomes reality. The responsibility now falls on the American people to speak out, to refuse silence, to demand accountability, To protect the Constitution before the war, Trump threatens becomes real. This is not about left or right. This is not about party politics. This is about democracy itself. And the choice is clear. Allow a man to turn the military against its own people, or reject the path of authoritarianism before it is too late. The silence of that room was heavy. The horror was real. And the message could not be clearer. Donald Trump has declared a war from within. The question now is whether America will stop him before it is too late. If you believe in truth, if you believe in democracy, if you believe the military should defend the people, not attack them, then speak up. Share this message. Refuse silence. Support independent voices who bring you the truth. Stand against authoritarianism before it becomes the new normal. Because the future of America depends on what we do now.